I'm Paul White. I'm a proprietor for a social enterprise called All About the Place. Platform. It's a platform for enabling change to take place at place level, basically. What we have come to the conclusion of is that the social transformation and change that we need to see delivered can be enacted upon and sort of progressed at a community level and driven by community. And in that approach, we bring the public sector to those initiatives in a way that is about supporting those initiatives rather than necessarily landing with a prescribed solution and then trying to implement that or impose that on a community in a way that just doesn't work. So we've spent quite a lot of time looking at the history of change and the dynamics of social change in particular, and why it hasn't worked, why we have a persistent problems with poverty, with deprivation, homelessness, and come to the conclusion that it's because we've been operating a thematic approach to addressing these problems rather than a joined up place-based approach. And so we see a great opportunity in moving forward. But what we built are things that are designed to enable that to happen. So we recognise, for example, there's no community informatics service for VCSE and operators within the community space, as there is within the public sector, within public health or within even acute trusts and departments within the local authority. There are information functions that specialise in servicing those departments' information needs. We haven't seen anything comparable to that operating out until recently within the community space. So we first set about trying to address that by building an informatics service and solution, and working out how we can make that accessible and usable within a community context, so that they then have information they need to form the projects they need to see started. And that's one area of focus. And then the other is some service support to that, in terms of recognizing there's need for new governance structures that facilitate and enable participation, of engagement, of collaboration, when sometimes the collaborators and the participators have competing needs and competing requirements to work on. So it's how do we break that down and stop competition within space and bring everybody together that needs to come together to actually work as a partnership in delivering, but in the process not lose obviously the members of the community themselves, have them as an integral part of the co-design conversation of the direction of travel for the project, and with the ability to influence the outcomes that they need to see within their place.
Sounds fantastic. Do you want to give me a little demonstration of what your platform looks like and what
Sure.
it can do?
Yeah, sure. So, and this probably brings all of that narrative nicely together to some extent. So this is a project that we've been sponsored to build a proof of concept solution. So this has taken the ideation of what we were looking at doing and what we were already working on, but bringing it all together now into a single solution. So this is Somerset focused, but at the back end, we built it with national capability. So we can land this same type dashboard in any place-based project in anywhere in the certainly in England and certainly Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland too, but if we extend the data range we've got. So this is intended to be a dashboard type solution. We are addressing 4 key areas presently. So impact and social value, outputs reporting, which is essentially activity data coming directly from communities. So that's a new area and quite an exciting area that isn't being explored as far as we can see anywhere else at the moment. A knowledge library to help boost and build capability within the community and give access to information to the community itself so that it can carry on innovating and being more entrepreneurial wherever the opportunity arises. And then in Somerset's case, they're leveraging the local insight mapping solution, technically mapping solution agnostic. So if another area is using a different kind of solution, we can work with that. Or indeed, if they've got no solution, we can offer a solution. But local insight is an extremely powerful tool that Somerset have selected in their case. And so we've accommodated and built that into the proposition. And the aim of this is for Somerset to be able to better demonstrate the full extent of the VCSE sector's work all across the patch to the public sectors. People who are members of Spark Somerset, for example, the primary sponsor of the solution, are sitting on the Integrated Care Board of the Integrated Care System. but they're also engaged with the local authority and talking to the local authority about different projects and initiatives that they wish to run. And so what they were very keen to do is help those organisations understand the vast body of work that is undertaken by VCSEs, both registered and unregistered. So formal groups that are registered with the Charity Commission or registered as CSCs for Company House, but also alongside those ad hoc community groups that are still doing valuable and important work. So there's a data capturing exercise going on there. They were supported by some key VCSE partners, which are listed down here as well. So they have been influential in contributing to the design of the solution, to what it is that we want to achieve, and also supporting us broaden the engagement with the platform as we've gone forward. And if I go through them then in the order they are on the screen. So the impact and social value presently, and in fact, just very recently, Somerset have selected their preferred tool for the measurement of social impact and value. So they're going to be utilising the social value engine in the first instance. They'd explored the social value portal alongside that, but I think the conclusion reached was that the social value portal catered more for public service procurement and social value being delivered through that mechanism. So it didn't quite suit the needs of how we measured actual work that was being done by VCSEs and community. The social value engine does that to a better extent, but it still has gaps in its measures. So the beauty of the social value engine is that we can develop measures that we can add into that platform and therefore extend its capability and what it's reporting on. The ambition and the next stage of development that we're about to commence is we start using the social value engine to produce measures and outputs on projects that are happening within the community. And then we're going to present that back through this dashboard through Microsoft Power BI as a accessible, clickable way for people to understand how value is being delivered across the patch in different categories of service. So that's quite exciting and about to commence as the next phase of work. But what we have got in here is a library of existing social value reports that different organisations in Somerset have already produced for work that they've done over past years. So this is intended to offer to those that are either looking to start a VCSE or have one but aren't necessarily reporting presently their social impact, gives them an indication of the kinds of ways that people can do it. So they can preview a report in here, and of course they can actually download and load it to the system, but they can see the kinds of ways that people have articulated the kind of extent of work they're doing, the value that they're bringing to a community, and what that looks like. So this we feel is a very useful aid, obviously, for encouraging more and more promotion of the way that people are doing work and talking of social value and social impact.
Just to come in on this point, I think, it's really essential that it's transparent what communities are working on, what they're hoping to achieve, but also even though that's fantastic, there are kind of issues with people not using the same metrics, or some people might use a Word document, some people might use something a bit more snazzy. So how people actually report can be a bit uneven and possibly cause issues in terms of comparability. So I'm just wondering, in terms of integrating those data sets so that there can be some more cohesion around what people are measuring without telling everybody what to do.
So what we're doing is we are setting out data standards. In fact, I can show you that now. But the idea is that we actually bring about some degree of uniformity of standardization in the way that social value, social impact is articulated. And we're also extending the solution with an artificial intelligence capability where, as well as looking at the reporting of numbers and metrics from the social value engine, for example, the story and the narrative changed in place from people, from members of the community, from the organisations that provide that, can be layered in alongside that, and we can look at how we summarise that to give a county-wide view that would be of particular interest to, or sort of a more regionalised view within the county, that in a way that would be interesting to integrated care systems and obviously local authorities when it comes to, for example, the areas of deprivation and the impacts and work that might be going on in those particular targeted areas. So we are leveraging technology very much to try to bring about some degree of uniformity in the approach.
It's really interesting because I'm incredibly interested in that kind of qualitative aspect of how do you capture what change feels like to people, or how other people can see it, because we all see things very differently and different communities will see things in different ways as well. how you're going to capture that more qualitative aspect?
Yeah, so not yet here on the Insights Home Hub, but there's an additional pane likely to feature at the bottom here, which will be called Community Voices. And so what we'll be looking to do is provide the facility for podcasts, for videos, files, as well as written narratives to be submitted directly from organisations and from people within the community themselves that have been impacted. So we build a real strong narrative around the impact of change and what it means to people in the real terms, so to speak, and then sort of layer that alongside the numbers. So as well as having a new kind of well-being measure to sit along, for example, economic measures like GDP, we have this narrative, this verbal narrative that's been produced directly from the voices of people in the community.
How do you see this being something that the community go to understand what's changing rather than just going to the most loudest shouting social media platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. How did it become a bit of a focal point? I think the idea in the way that we would like to implement it. So this is Somerset, for example, and it's county-wide. I think there are opportunities to implement versions of this at a small and more macro level around a specific place-based project that might exist, for example, in an area of high deprivation within a town or within a village location or a coastal location. At the back end, we're capturing data and enabling that story and narrative to be built, for a very specific community, but to become connected to the broader messaging that might be coming from the community, to be connected to the broader messaging that might be coming from the county, to ultimately that be connected to the broader message across the region. So the theory is that whilst this might be implemented at a very macro level, at the back end, we're obviously through consent and an agreement to share, we're able to assimilate data and then layer it out to different geographies according to what people are interested in. And so ultimately, the idea would be is that we have something that can lend itself to helping policy setting at a national level on the basis that, we are able to tap into live narratives, almost real-time narratives from communities right across the whole of the UK to give the central policy makers something really informed and directive in the way that they are shaping policy for the next whatever period of time that they are doing so.
Because that's been something that's always been very fundamental to my research, is that how do you get those connectors between the very local and scale it up, even to the international level.
Yes.
And so you have to have something that connects and that can be comparable at scale. That might be the SDGs or it might be something else. But obviously this particular government has got the missions, hasn't it? So it's got these different missions that it's trying to achieve, and missions will have different measures as well. So do you see that this platform could readily map this data and kind of have a taxonomy around mission-led government as well?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're saying is in the way that we want to implement this, we're never going to define place ourselves. That will be entirely for the end user organization that wants the solution. So if it's an organization that's operating nationally and wants to leverage the platform to provide this data assimilation from perhaps what a multitude of local projects, will do that. That's not a problem at all. The intention is to be appealing to multiple audiences. So, even though it might be being used in a very macro way in, say, 30 projects across Somerset, that the integrated care system of Somerset is able to understand and simulate that, see that information for those 30 projects in a joined up way, and therefore, can leverage it in the context of setting policy or implementing other projects that might be complementary to what's happening in communities. And yeah, that just keep layering up all the way to national level where central government, for example, could use this to help guide them in understanding and connecting, obviously, as well. So there's plans to extend this with two-way communication channels so that communities could be reached by central policy makers and has, to provide perhaps bespoke information or feedback around policy ideas. So try and basically give anybody that wants to or needs to access to those innovators and entrepreneurs that are operating at the community level, doing really transformative things, and try to utilize that as much as we possibly can to just keep delivering positive change on a continuous improvement basis.
How do you see that this particular platform and this particular data solution could lead to innovative policy making in terms of identifying things that maybe other data sets may masquerade or not be revealing, but can be revealed through your website?
But by basically enabling people at a very local level to provide intelligence and information on their work within the local community, it's as honest as you can get, in theory. That level of trust in the data and the way the data helps and supports local communities to deliver and enact transformation of their own accord, just keeps layering out and building out. So I think, the fact that also there's the opportunity that this becomes quite real time in the way that it's reporting on change that's happening, for the last month, for the last 6 months, not for as the IMD currently does. That's 2019, so it's nearly 6 years out of date in theory. I mean, it's still very, very usable. But we are aiming to try and get this as real time as we possibly can. So it's even, in terms of capability, it will exceed what public health have currently got access to at the minute in terms of understanding what's genuinely happening by way of change within communities.
I'd like you to give me a bit of a walk around in terms of like local insight mapping and how somebody might use that and what comparisons you can make.
Yeah. Okay. I've just flag it. So in this outputs reporting, at the moment for Somerset, we've been collating children and young people's data. So we have currently 11 local providers are giving us data for the year 22-23 in terms of activity. And we've got information about the age groups, the ethnicities, the presenting needs of those young people, and some data on outcomes, and then some information about the activity itself that was serviced and delivered to those young people. So we have 2,000 rows of data that are coming through at the minute, and obviously we're extending that now as we go forward. But under here, that's being collated and captured and then presented through a Power BI dashboard. Now, some of that data is also finding its way into the local insight system to actually provide a profile of where the activity is happening across the county. So we've got both. So this is the thing, I think, the USP this solution delivers above anything else at the minute, in that we're now collating metrics from VCSE service delivery itself and then mapping that and understanding the geography of that delivery that's happening across the patch. And they're looking to extend this to include now older generational data, perhaps dementia services. So there's no limit to what we can capture and collect and report on, but that's what we're doing through the platform. The beauty of the local insights tool, if you're a local innovator or entrepreneur or a placemaker or community builder and you're looking to do something different within place, you instantly have through this platform over 130 indicators you can click on and link into to examine the situation in place. So, and it goes down to LSOA levels. So if we looked at health indicators, for example, and so to pick one, health deprivation work, we have the data mapped geographically. So if we were particularly interested in the Bridgewater area, at the moment, because of the zoomed out level, we're looking at MSOA. But as we zoom in, the data gets more granular and breaks down to LSOA level. So this is strategically significant for anybody looking to do any particular piece of work in a place, and that they can produce this information, these layers of data, quite quickly and easily to understand the profile of need in place. They can bespokely map out their area on the solution and then have it build a report. We're listing all the different indicators that are interested in a pre-compiled sort of report that then details the very specific data that they might need to help inform business investors or decision makers or whoever it might be about the need for supporting the project. So that's a first, as far as I can see, for VCSEs. And a lot of this information is available to public health and is used in a form of needs assessment. In this case, now it can be used to actually start to build and stand up solutions at place level.
Just to clarify that OC developed the local place 2.0 insights tool, and it is a subscription, so it's not kind of necessarily available for anybody to use freely, but it does have the potential to have a subscription and then be embedded in solutions like yours. And as you said, this is a Somerset thing. Just wondering, obviously funding is a bit few and far between at the moment. There's a lot of cost pressures. And there is the idea that maybe if there was a sharing of resources or
Yeah.
sharing of admin solutions or not having overlap in the delivery of services, then maybe there might be some more efficiencies and have more impactful delivery. So how can your tool assist with that kind of way of working?
Yes, exactly. I think so. Somerset aren't looking at this yet, but they will inevitably come to it. But where we are in conversation with other areas that are, in particular, looking at placemaking opportunity, then what we're able to surface through these tools and through the dashboard is the levels of overlap, as you've rightly said, that do exist, for example, within the VCSE sector. And when you're looking at place, the truth of the issue that we currently have is service delivery is very thematically oriented. You know, it's homelessness, or it's housing, or it's mental health, or it's children and young people. There's very little where it's about bringing all those different agencies together to look at the combined issues of place and the cause and effect issues of place, so that you actually end up taking people on journeys that might mean they traverse through multiple service providers on that journey to get the different levels of support and assistance they need and development they need to get to an end outcome that's a much more positive place for them. So this visualization, this mapping, and then the ability to layer in additional service information like VCSE service providers. So if I, in another mapping solution, what we've done is we've mapped the areas of deprivation for the top 30%. So that shows us the clusters of deprivation where they exist in a county. And then we can turn on the service types of the different charities and community providers, so children and young people, and it will then place based on proximity those charities according to the areas of deprivation. And instantly we see that there might be 20 or 30 organisations offering children and young people services in that location, but it's rare that many of them are talking. So an instant opportunity for placemaking is to bring them collectively together and establish the coalition, so that they are starting to look at how they can optimise service delivery by, just as you suggested, by perhaps outsourcing their combined administration functions to a central core group that's managed by them all, but shared by them all, so that rather than everyone have their own different administrative functions, they now have a smaller pool of administrators and more resource being able to put to the front line as a result. Somerset's a good point in case. 305 CACs are registered in Somerset, 2,250 charities and voluntary communities. That's formal registered. So that doesn't take into account all the ad hoc groups that are out there doing great work, and there's probably as many again. So there's a real opportunity for a lot of rationalization within those 2,250 charities, for example, where they can start to perhaps share some of the less frontline functions and become essentially be able to put more resource into the frontline work. And then suddenly some of the bottlenecks that we've got, or some of the inability to respond to community needs, becomes unlocked, because now we've got extra capacity that we didn't have before. And that can happen at relatively low cost, and arguably with probably next to no investment from the public sector. That's just about having that agency type view, that's that exposure and surfacing of that intelligence and information, and then posing the question to them. And in most cases, most charities will recognise the opportunity for an efficiency gain and go for it. And they don't need to be instructed necessarily or guided. So yeah, there's lots, I think, of capacity within the existing system that could be found and leveraged before we need to consider large-scale investment.
Because, I mean, in a way, you know, like the funding application process is set up, although it does allow for some partnerships to kind of happen, it is ultimately encouraging quite a competitive, you're either in or you're out,
Yes.
you either get the funding or not. And so
Yes.
you've talked about sociocracy, you've talked about how this could potentially enable a sharing of resource. How else do you see that it could potentially transform the way that funding happens?
It has to be honest. I mean, you know, the funding lines have followed the same sort of thematic approach to service delivery, and that's just failed to deliver the fundamental transformation that we need. We need a collaborative, engaged, and partnership type approach to how we address the problems and challenges of place. They're interconnected, they're interrelated. You can't separate them, and you can't deal with them as a singular. So we need exactly the same from the funding streams. And one of the critical issues with funding is if you're able to go to a funding group, you have a business case already set out, like the lottery, for example, and you've already put the seed investment into the idea and covered that cost. It's not necessarily too difficult to get access to the fund to be able to proceed. But when you're dealing with something like we are, where it's very transformative, it's taken an entirely different and new approach to things, actually getting the support funding to build that proposition out is nigh on impossible. We don't have easy access to philanthropic funders that are looking at social transformation and change agendas. And that's a fundamental gap that exists out there. I think there are shifts occurring. I think the National Lottery is beginning to think there is another way of funding change within a local community context, but it's a few years behind some of the innovative thinkers for communities themselves. So we're waiting for them to catch up rather than them actually bring us to the table and involve us in the co-design of what they might need to do, which is, again, one of the other frustrating things is that, you need innovational thinking to recognize that we've got to shift from the current system delivery model to something new. And that's just not really very well supported at all. Yeah, it does exist within the community.
How do you see that funding could become more place-based, and maybe this is a role for local authorities, maybe it's redistributing planning gain, maybe it's there's lots of different ways, maybe it's kind of like a local taxation, not another tax. Do you see that you can really embed that kind of localized impact funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and probably the ideas I might have around that are very recent and emergent. And I've got an innovation team that I'm working with, and it's one of those that I'm going to be throwing on the whiteboard and asking them to bring their brain power to. One suggestion I've got is that if we think about council tax and distribution of council tax back into the public sector to deliver services, there's an element of perhaps where a community has come together to offer change in a way that delivers measurable impact to reductions in demand, for example, on public service delivery, that maybe the funding that would ordinarily have been allocated, for example, say to the Crime Commissioner for supporting innovation in that space around that thing, instead, perhaps that funding could be allocated directly to the community so that they do the requirements piece and identify the opportunity and the needs and are funded to do that. And then with the proportion of funding that the Crime Commission has retained, they bring the services that that are needed in the way that the community needs them to be brought to effect and help deliver that change. So there's something about the local taxation that happens through council tax, for example, and how maybe that could be used in a different way to support and stand up these agency type place-based service provisions. There's an awful lot that communities will do themselves with their own resources without needing external funding, but inevitably, the kind of platform that we're standing up, that ability to unify measure to help tell a story in a common and recognized way, there's a cost to doing that. So that needs to be met somehow from if we're going to that macro level from within the community or sponsored from outside the community. I think the other area just to mention, so alongside those 305 CICs and 2,200 charities, there's 28,000 businesses in Somerset. So what contribution could they make in terms of social value, social impact? Obviously, we know that many are looking at things like B Corp and ESG and social value themselves within commercial contracts they might have with the public sector. But how can we align that more directly to supporting specific place-based projects and allow them to become part of the positive narrative and use that positive narrative to promote their business in new ways to the local community, for example? I mean, obviously 28,000 businesses, the vast majority of them are SMEs, they're very community focused. They're already community contributors. So, it's perhaps there's an opportunity to more formalize what they're doing and how they contribute in a more broader sense to the development of community itself. So that may be another source of income, of revenue potentially, or way of funding that that we're sort of beginning to start to explore a little bit further?
Definitely. I mean, I've written before about the idea about regenerative value and how if you could kind of measure and quantify the overall holistic, which is a word not everybody likes, and the interdependencies of different, social value, human capital, etc., and find a way to kind of value that and incentivize around that added value. And it's, I think quite a lot of the time things are thought of in silos, whether it's environmental and nature value or social value, and place is about everything working in harmony.
Yes.
And what we need is like a redistributive, localized way to incentivize and reward people to kind of to act for local good. Communities are complex, and not everybody in a community is the same and thinks the same. So it attend to that and be respectful of that as well. And I completely agree that it's not only on the VCSEs to kind of deliver this unmet need arising from underinvestment, or just the fact that local authorities have a certain remit and they can't do everything, because we are all human at the end of the day, aren't we? So we all kind of have a shared vested interest into making society work. So I think that if there was a social value agenda at a place-based level for all businesses and all of us, that would be a really wonderful thing.
I think that's the reality, isn't it? We all care, but the key is it's proximity. We care about those things that are closest to us. So then, when we think of place, it's where we live, it's our street, it's our neighborhood, it's our estate, it's our parks. So when we think about placemaking, if we can, leverage that relationship, that love of place that people are naturally in, people will extend what they have to offer to that place. There are 100,000 volunteers in any one area really that are providing services across the whole of a county in typical sense. So there's another 100,000 people sat at home on their settees thinking I could do more, but I don't know where to start. So if they now have visual access to, this is my place, this is what's happening in my place, here are organizations that are doing great things, they'll be able to identify one that they want to connect with and perhaps bring something to. If we can bring another 100,000 volunteers out into the street, that will have a massive impact again on our opportunity to influence and implement change. So that combination with finding novel new ways of bringing resource into situ is where I think the vehicle of change can start to really build up some speed and get going. And then it's a question of, with the public sector, acknowledging the challenges that they're in, but then saying, well, look, if we can package our ask of what it is that we need from them very explicitly and enable them to understand the social value and social impact of it, then we simplify their decision-making process and being able to go, yes, we can support that. Or if we can't directly support that, we can help you though to get the resource you need to do that. So we recognise that's worth our time, investing our time in if we can't invest in other ways into helping you get going. And I think that's the key. There's the new directive that's coming out from government around the integrated care systems and what they expect them to do. And they've very much emphasised neighbourhood working, but it's already coming with a slant on it about essentially helping the NHS get out of the crisis it's in. So it's not about early intervention prevention. So already we're beginning to feel, well, the integrated care system is going to become quite narrow in its focus and the way it can support placemaking and neighbourhood building. So we'll have to turn to the local authority, and this is where all about the place sits in, to just bring the key players to the table and say, now look, there is great opportunity here and you're missing it. And here we are, we can show you it, we can map it, we can demonstrate it, and we can demonstrate the suggested social value, social impact opportunities.
Do you want to say a little bit about the sociocratic way and how it actually can support social enterprise models, or just generally like community interventions, and also mutualism and cooperativism as well?
It's exactly that. So this is the other thing that all about the place is providing alongside the data service. So we recognise that if you're going to bring, essentially people and members of the community that are directly affected by the concerns that are happening within the community, and put them at a table alongside the VCSEs that will then sit alongside perhaps commercial business and then the public sector, that you've got a wide variation of power and capability set at that table. So there needs to be some form of levelling, some way of ensuring that there's equality in the participation of the people there. And very and I think very importantly, we need to start listening more to the community, because the community know what they need, and equally sometimes know what they need to happen to put it right. And so they're already one step ahead when it comes to the co-design conversation that's spoken of quite often. So we need to elevate their voices and give them more empowerment and more capability to have their say at the table. And sociocracy helps with that. It helps, somebody to submit a proposal and then ensure, as the proposal goes around the table, all voices are heard. Everybody has the opportunity to have a say on what form that proposal should take and how it could be taken forward. But equally, I think, we recognise it won't be just one VCSE or one business or even one public service organisation. It's going to be a multitude of different organisations, each coming to the table with their own value proposition, their own mission. So we need some kind of governance framework that sits above that, that can bring them together in a participatory and collaborative way. And we see the cooperative model as being fundamental to that. So it's a virtual cooperative structure where each individual organisation can maintain their own mission, but what they're working towards is that there's a collective goal of the placemaking initiative, the overarching aims and objectives that have been agreed in terms of what needs to be achieved. And we think that within that, then you can recognise those opportunities of the rationalisations that occur. So, as we talked about earlier on, the sharing of admin functions across charities, for example, and perhaps some of that being contributed to by the business sector, and therefore stand that up under the cooperative structure as a new entity that supports that whole framework, provide some of the efficiency gains that in that opportunity, but also then help deliver sustainability to that structure for the long term. So again, the opportunity is recognizing that if we are tackling poverty, for example, it's going to take years to resolve the challenges of poverty in any one given place. So whatever's stood up in the first year needs to have the capability to get to the second year, to the third year, to the fourth, to the fifth, for as long as it's needed. And so again, that's sort of a framing of the governance structure and then understanding what local capacity there is to bring the skills, the capability needed to run that as a kind of business fund service, is how we achieve sustainability without having to go to a backer like the local authority and say, well, you've got to fund this for 10 years, which we know at the moment they couldn't possibly commit to. So we think there's a way of actually making that self-sustaining by enabling that structure to come to life and be retained and owned by the project and the initiative, not dominated by any one party that might be sitting at the table. And there are various flavours in those principles, around cooperative governance structures and sociocracy, and we can tailor and adapt to whatever works best within a particular area. But the fundamentals are equality in voices, community having a lead, if you like, on the co-design, on the defining of what's required, and then the leading of the co-design, the process, and others supporting that process, but bringing skills and capability to the mix rather than just a very loud voice in a dominant direction of travel.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. I think you have very beautifully illustrated just, how your solution can reveal what the community are working on, what they could be working on, could potentially, if including other kind of additional governance and impactful investment strategies and everything, unlock a different way of doing things, a less contentious, divisive way of looking at things, and really kind of look towards a more collaborative and embedded and understood contribution that we can all make to society. So well done on what you've done, and I think it's a great solution. So thank you very much.
I think we're now getting to an exciting point, but I think it's still rocket science to a few people that we've got sat at the table from the public sector, and there's a high degree of nervousness about that sort of potential relinquishing of some of the power.